Mr. Carr.
Good morning, Chairman Towns,
Ranking Member Issa, and other distinguished members of the committee. On behalf of the National Community Reinvestment Coalition, I'm honored to speak with you today about the racial dimensions of the current economic crisis. Despite talk of a recovery, the U.S. economy remains mired in the worst economic crisis in more than half a century, and even the most optimistic economists are expecting a jobless recovery. For most people, a jobless recovery is a meaningless statistic in the real world, where families are struggling to pay their mortgage, buy food, afford health care, pay the college tuition for their children, or save to ensure that they can retire in dignity. Already, median income has fallen to the lowest level in more than 10 years, and poverty is growing at an alarming rate. In fact, a close examination of the fine print of the positive earnings news of many firms further dampens the enthusiasm for the coming recovery. Recent positive earning reports, for example, for large financial firms, reveals that creative accounting, massive federal subsidies, and one-time asset sales are largely responsible for a lot of the good news. In fact, at the current pace, the total number of bank failures this year will likely be the worst year in the industry's history. The reason for the disappointing nature of the recovery is that foreclosures, which was the problem that imploded the financial and credit markets and the economy, continue to rise. More than 1.5 million families have faced foreclosure this year, and at least another 1.5 million are heading that way. In fact, the Center for Responsible Lending estimates that as many as 12 million more foreclosures may occur by the year 2012. This is not an equal opportunity economic crisis. The current crisis is having a disproportionately negative impact on communities of color in two ways. First, communities of color were the disproportionate targets for the most abusive and reckless predatory loans, and as a result, they're experiencing much higher levels of concentrated foreclosures. Second, they are the most negatively impacted by rising unemployment. And unemployment rates for Latinos, African Americans, and Native Indians living on Native reservations, as was stated earlier, are either close to or more than twice that for non-Hispanic white households. Because African Americans and Latinos have comparatively few savings, they're poorly positioned to survive long-term unemployment. Potentially millions of African Americans and Latinos could find themselves falling out of the middle class and into poverty before this crisis is over. Current wealth disparities are not the result of market forces or the invisible hand of Adam Smith. Rather, they are the consequence of the very visible hand of discrimination and its legacy. The peddling of high-cost and irresponsible loans disproportionately to communities of color is only the most recent manifestation of continuing bias against minorities in the financial markets. Excessive subprime lending in lower-income communities was not the result of pressure placed on financial firms through the Community Reinvestment Act. It had nothing to do with lenders attempting to increase home ownership among minority families. The subprime market collapsed because regulation of that market was woefully inadequate and in many respects non-existent. Almost every institutional actor in the home mortgage finance process played a role in the collapse, including the brokers, lenders, appraisers, credit rating agencies, and investment banks. Together, these institutions created a toxic mix that percolated for years until it boiled over and overwhelmed not just the mortgage markets, but the entire financial system. 5 specific remedies should be pursued to address this crisis, and I address them in detail in my written testimony. First, more must be done to stem the foreclosure crisis. The administration's Making Home Affordable program has a number of important incentives to encourage intransigent servers to participate, but it lacks sticks. It needs some sticks, such as bankruptcy reform that would cost the American public nothing but potentially save millions of households from foreclosure. Second, we need to restructure the financial system regulation to focus on the protection of consumers. Protecting consumers' rights is the best way to ensure avoiding systemic risk to the system. In addition, we need to make sure that the Community Reinvestment Act is expanded so as to ensure that all communities receive equal access to safe, sound products. Third, communities that have borne a disproportionate impact of the current crisis should be prioritized for funding. That is not happening currently. Fifth, federal government must more actively combat discrimination, which is the largest barrier to economic mobility. In conclusion, let me just say that within the next 35 years, minorities will constitute half of the American population. Yet this fastest growing share of the nation's population are among the most least well-housed, have the most limited access to labor and financial markets, and are disproportionately isolated from quality education and health care, which are key to economic mobility. Globalization represents a competitive challenge for America in this century we've never had before. If America is to continue to be an economic, political, and intellectual superpower, it must move further into the 20th century by eliminating the old paradigm of discrimination. All Americans must be prepared for and allowed to compete. Succeeding in a new globalized, highly competitive world is not just an option, it is an imperative. Thank you.